right, looks like we're recording. Hey, everybody, how is it going? I am very happy to have on my channel once again your friend and mine, Tim Durling from Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Of course, Tim is a very prolific author. The last time we got together, I believe, was to talk about the Sammy Hagar book, which had just come out, Red on Black. And now, just a few months later, we've got another book from Tim that has hit the shelves. Sing Me Away, the Night Ranger album review. Now, if you were a fan of the Y&T album review, the Kansas album review, or like I just said, the Sammy Hagar album review, you are going to love this book. Welcome, Tim.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks for having me on yet again. It's always a pleasure, and thank you for contributing to this book.
Oh yeah, no, it was a blast, and you've got a lot of contributors. I mean, the contributing author section is a couple pages long, but you've got some great contributors here, um, all big Night Ranger fans, and that's what I love about these books is that for each album, each song that you review, everybody's got a different take on it. Everybody comes at it from a different place. Everybody has their favorites. Everybody has songs or albums that they're not as fond of. But just you got such a nice cross section of music fans, journalists, just people from all walks of life in the industry. How did you pull all of these interesting writers together?
Well, it's interesting too because I really wanted to uh, push the limits on this one. This is the biggest book I've done. It's almost 300 pages, and each chapter, so it's 13 albums, so each chapter has 10 panelists. There's some panelists that do multiple albums. There's no exact matches as to which panelists are in which chapter, but yeah, there's 10 per chapter. So it's a pretty hefty read, and in that you get a lot of great content. Like yourself, there's a lot of returning people that I've had in my books before, but I got to know a lot of folks through an excellent Night Ranger fan podcast called Fans in Motion, and it's grown to the point where Josh that runs it is kind of affiliated with the band and takes care of their social. So it's pretty cool. It started as a fan site, and the band took notice because they really didn't have that much presence. There were small fan groups here and there. So I met a lot of really knowledgeable Night Ranger fans and who, had stuff I'd never seen and knew stuff I didn't know. So I learned things about this band that I've been into for so many years doing this book. So yeah, it was a combination of asking people to come back that had already been in the books and new people I'd met along the way. And I think that the end combination is just a great, like you said, people are coming at this from different angles. We've got different age groups represented here. We've got people that have been into the band since the beginning, and we've got people that have only been into the band for a few years. And then we've got a lot of people who, I would ask about doing this who said, "Oh, I like Night Ranger. I've got Midnight Madness and Seven Wishes, or I've got the greatest hits, but I don't know any of these newer albums, but, uh, give me a few to listen to and I'll listen to them." And so that's happened a lot. And they've come back to me and said, "These are great. I've just purchased them." So, that's really cool too. That's the point. That is to spread the word about this band. Not only to the people that read it, but hey, the people can contribute to it. If they like, I had no idea that they're still making new music and it's really good. That's one of the main reasons I wanted to put this out because much like with the Kansas book, I was so into those last two Kansas albums, and I thought it's such a shame that these albums they just reach a limited audience. That's just the reality of it. Same thing with Night Ranger. I mean, their last four albums have all been really good, and I thought, what a shame that they're actually still putting out new music. They're not just touring and touring and touring and touring. They're doing that too, but they're making new music, and it's good. That needs to be celebrated. So that's one of the reasons why they were kind of next in line for me to do a book on. Also, like I've said before, there's never been a book on this band. So I said, we got to fix that.
Yeah, well, and if there were any doubt whether there was an audience for this book actually made it onto the Amazon Music bestseller list, did it not?
When it first came out, yeah, which was that's very gratifying, and you know the sales have been pretty good. I mean, and the thing is, right now, I hope that the band does another album. I mean, it's been 4 year cycles, so 2025 would make it time for another one. I don't know if there's any plans on it, but this information, anything in this book, it's not going to go outdated like right anytime soon. So people will pick it up over time too. You know, the sales are keep trickling in. And one of my favorite things to see is that when I put a new book out, this happens every time, I see a little spark in sales or spike in sales of my previous books. And because there's a lot of these bands that I do these books on, there's a lot of similar fandoms across, you know, and someone pointed this out to me, and it was totally unintentional, but it just so happens. They said, well, with the exception of Kansas, everybody you've done a book on so far has been from the Bay Area, the San Francisco Bay Area. I'd never thought about that, but you're
Yeah,
right.
that's true.
Y&T, Sammy
YNT.
Hagar, Night Ranger. And
Yeah.
so because of that, there's a lot of connections. I mean, you take I mean, for starters, you've got Alan Fitzgerald, who was Night Ranger's original keyboard player. He was in Montrose, he was in Sammy Hagar's solo band. Um, and as far as Y&T are concerned, they shared a lot of bills, Night Ranger and Y&T. Both Dave Meniketti and Brad Gillis were on the Hearing Aid Stars song. So yeah, there's a lot of cross pollination with a lot of these groups that are from the same basic area, even though they're all very different to each other, I think.
Hmm. Now, I know you talk about this in your book, but for people who haven't read it yet, how did you first get in the Night Ranger?
Well, it's fun. I've never been one of those people that were in on the ground floor with a band. I discovered them probably when I was 9, like most of the world did. I heard Sister Christian on the radio, and I'm like, I had no idea what motorin was supposed to mean. I had no idea. All I knew is I liked it. Like I said, I was 9 years old, so I wasn't buying music, and I really wasn't into heavy music at all. I was, just whatever was on the radio. But this song was catchy enough, and it had just enough guitar, and I just liked it. And so that's how they came up on my radar. Even though I didn't initially know who it was, I just knew I liked the song.
Hmm. Right. Now, one thing I didn't realize because I was familiar with 80s Night Ranger, and then you had the book coming out and you asked me if I would review a couple albums. I didn't realize they were still putting out music. And not only that, but it's actually really good. I
Yeah.
was surprised because a couple of the albums that I reviewed, like the other guy you were talking about, I'd not heard some of the records that I was reviewing. So I was listening to them on streaming. My expectations, I got to admit, like were very low just because so much time had passed, and I thought, well, how good is it going to be? But they are actually still putting out really quality music. And if you like the Night Ranger of the 80s, I really strongly encourage you to check out their more recent output because always stayed more or less faithful to that Night Ranger sound. I mean, I know Jack Blades left for a period, but even that Mojo album, I was shocked at how good that was, even without Jack Blades.
Yeah, no, you hit it on the nail right there. I mean, you're somebody, and I've had other people say this to me too, people that are pretty knowledgeable about their music, right? If we don't know this stuff is out, imagine the average listener that's not actively watching and looking for things. Yeah, all those Frontiers Records albums, well, maybe the exception of Hole in the Sun, but since somewhere in California, they've really recaptured that classic sound. They, like most bands, they went through a few twists and turns, especially the 90s. The 90s was really tough on a lot of bands from the 80s, especially bands that were just playing like melodic rock, and they weren't out to reinvent the wheel. They just were trying to, make good, feel good music, right? It was a dirty word in the 90s, right? And yeah, you hit upon something, and a lot of people come back and say, I didn't even know this Feeding Off the Mojo album existed. And then, they listened to it. I said, this, a lot of people say that it really doesn't sound much like Night Ranger, but I like it. and it's the forbidden album. They don't even count it in their numbering system. You know, they came up with seven, the seventh seven album in 1998. That's their eighth studio album, if you count Beating Off the Mojo. But you know, Jack wasn't there, and he's such an essential part of Night Ranger. But if you listen to the songs that Kelly is the only vocalist on, to me, it sounds like Night Ranger. You've still got Kelly and Brad. And Gary Moon's a great singer. He just doesn't sound anything like Jack. He's got that high raspy voice. He sounds more like Tom Kiefer than uh, than Jack Blades. But I kind of look at that album. I always look at that album actually the same as the 1994 Motley Crue album with John Corabi on vocals. Maybe it doesn't sound like the group that's listed on there, but it's good. And it came out at a time when there just weren't a lot of classic bands that were putting out really, really, really good albums. And and it's on this small little label. It was, you know, completely forgotten about. And that's another reason. Like these things need to be documented, I think. And so yeah, there was no way I was going to ignore that album, but you know, I wanted to give each of the albums their due. I didn't care if it was on a major label or not. And yeah, you've said what so many have said too, and I've said it, that these recent albums, yeah, there is that. I think everybody that's a fan of a classic band goes through this. If it's been a long time since they've put out an album, or maybe the last album they put out you weren't so into, you are excited when you find out there's new music coming out, but you're a little nervous because I think we've all asked ourselves the same question. What do we do if it sucks? How
Mhm.
are we going to support a band when we can't get behind it? But that's never been like with Night Ranger, they've been on such a roll, you get it out. It's like, not only is this good for a latter day album, it's just good. And
Mhm.
that's my opinion on these recent ones, especially Somewhere in California. Something was in the water when they were writing and recording that one. I think that one to me that could have come out in 90 or 91. Had the band never broke up and there never been a damn Yankees, Somewhere in California just sounds like the logical next step that they would have done. It's fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. Well, because there are some bands. I mean, I've been a U2 fan, but for about 20 years, I've been begging them to break up and just stop putting out these albums that are really, I mean, they're tarnishing your legacy the more substandard bad albums you put out. But that's not the case with Night Ranger, obviously. But yeah, you know, another thing that I wanted to bring up about this book, because there may be people watching who are not necessarily Night Ranger fans and kind of on the fence, but you know, I am by no means a Sammy Hagar or huge Sammy Hagar. I've got like one Sammy Hagar albums and the Van Halen albums of Sammy Hagar, but I was thoroughly entertained reading that book. And same for here, because this is not a bunch of Night Ranger fans gushing over every song, every album. If they don't like a song, if they don't like an album, I mean, they're not afraid to say it. So this is not a love letter to Night Ranger necessarily. I mean, it's the good with the bad. So it really is a critical review. And you've even got some people for some albums, you know, this album's fantastic, and other people, yeah, I was kind of underwhelmed. It's not my favorite. I don't care for it. So it's
Yep.
really honest. Even you, Tim, I mean, you wrote this book and you're brutally honest at times about what you do not like, what you feel was weak. And so, you know, it's not a one-sided, you know, just entirely positive review of Night Range
I,
book.
Well, thank you. And it just before I answer that, what you're saying about you too, I feel the same way about Bon Jovi. But yeah, I think you can only be honest in a book like this. This is not dirt. You know, I'm not interested in slinging mud. I love this band. I've been a huge fan of this band. I think they've never completely gotten their due. I think that they are a band that are a lot of people are aware of, or at least are aware of a couple of their songs, but I don't think most people don't dive deep into the albums. Um, Similar, not musically, but similar to the Kansas situation. Although Night Ranger never had an album that sold, you know, they never had an album that sold more than a single million, which is crazy to me. But anyway, I think a lot of people know the name or maybe you're vaguely aware of the song. Certainly most people that grew up, you know, starting in the 80s know Sister Christian in some capacity or another, but then they listen and go, "Oh, I guess I know that song too. I know When You Close Your Eyes. I know Sentimental Street." Uh, But yeah, I did. There's nothing where, no, very few bands hit it out of the park every time. My most favorite of bands don't hit it out of the park every single time. And if there was a song that was just like, I just don't think this is them at their best, or I can see where they're trying something, but it just doesn't work for me. And that's kind of the attitude that I took throughout it. And I think that people can tell, like when I come up with the questions for each of these that I send to whoever's going to be doing each album, I think you can kind of tell by the way I frame the questions without me saying it what I kind of think of the album. If I think it's a 10, then my questions are going to reflect that. If I'm not so into it, I kind of go, oh, well, this song is a little bit, but it's like I said, it's not mudslinging. It's all this is by the fans, for the fans, and for people that want to know more about this band. Like I've said many, many times, the Hole in the Sun album, which came out in 2007, to me, that I just shake my head at that one. I don't understand why it exists. I don't, and that was a point where, like kind of like what you were saying, that was their first new album in 9 years, and so I was waiting and waiting and waiting for it, and then I heard it, and I was like, I know I can't get into this. This is a very strange album for them, and so that's why it was just such a pleasant surprise when they kind of, I guess they kind of had to get that out of their system. Yet there's at least one person in that chapter who quite enjoys that album and are very good at explaining why they enjoy it. And spoiler alert, it's not because it sounds like Night Ranger, but they find things in it to like. So that's the great thing. If somebody might look at that album and go, "Boy, people don't seem to like this. I don't think I'll buy that," and then they read someone saying what they do like about it, and they go, "Okay, well, I like. Okay, I understand what he's saying. Oh, I like this band he's mentioning and that band. Maybe I'll check it out." And they find out, what are you talking about? This album's great. Fine, that's wonderful. But yeah, it's not sugar coated, but it's also not mudslinging. It's my honest opinion as a fan. These are how these songs are hitting me. There are songs that I think are absolute masterpieces that other people might listen to and go, meh, it's all right. So yeah, I've done that in all my books. It's because what would be the point of just saying everything's great? Um, I have to I always have to reference something that Marco Doria from the Contrarians said when we were doing an episode. He said, if you give everything a 10, that brings down the value of the truly great albums. Does that mean you're going to give those a 12? You can't, not everything's going to be a 10. Something's got to be at the bottom of your list, even if it's a strong 7. I don't think that Night Ranger put out any complete duds. I really don't. I think that there was a high standard of songwriting and a high standard of craft, but maybe some of the directions they went in just didn't hit me in that way of how that 80s stuff just had that perfect blend of the keyboards and guitars and the melody, and even if they're writing a heavy song, it was still hooky. But like I said, they worked those things out of their system and they got back on track, and it's worth celebrating. It's worth talking about.
Yeah, well, and there are people out there, I'm sure, who think that Night Ranger was a one-hit album, like, oh, it's just Midnight Madness and then
Yep.
whatever. But if you really look back, it's like, oh yeah, there was you know, songs like Sentimental Street, or oh yeah, Secret of My Success. I forgot that one. Oh yeah, You Can Still Rock in America. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
as you
Yep.
gradually go through each of these albums, it's like I forgot about that song. Yeah, they actually, they were more than just a sister Christian band,
Yeah.
which is what most people.
I mean, certainly that's a song that will outlive us all. That's pop culture. But I think everybody, every band, it doesn't matter. I think the good outweighs the bad. When you have a song like that that just penetrates and more people know the song than know the band that sing it, boy, you've really accomplished something there. Most bands would give their eye teeth to have a song that's just as soon as it begins, everybody knows. You know, like I said, everybody that grew up listening to the radio or watching music videos starting with the 80s, somebody says motorin, you know what they're talking about. You could probably go through a list of bands and be wrong every time about who sings it, but you know the song. It's and that's the only song they have that's like that. But in writing this, I think they've got other songs. Like I think that they should have all kinds of rock radio or pop radio staples. I think that they were, you know, say like a bands like Journey or Foreigner or REO Speedwagon. I mean, there's probably there's a good half dozen songs that honestly get sick of hearing. I
Mhm.
think Night Ranger's got plenty of songs that we should all be sick of hearing, but they just don't seem to have that. I mean, Jack Blade's got lucky. I mean, lightning struck twice because High Enough is like that too with Damn Yankees. But the funny thing is that now you go see Night Ranger, and of course he's going to do that song. It was an enormous hit, but I look at the crowd and I know that there's people going, I didn't know they sang this song.
Mhm.
Most people don't analyze stuff like we do, right? They just they either like it or they don't. And Night Ranger is not a name that just shouts at people. It's not like Guns N' Roses or Motley Crue or but um, they like the songs, and there's something to be said for that when they can just kind of quietly infiltrate, and hopefully somebody takes notice and maybe goes, I wonder what else they sang. And like you said, either they go, oh, I remember this, I remember that, or if they're younger fans, like I've never heard this before, but I like it.
Yeah, well, they're one of the few bands that have two lead vocalists that they can boast. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't name very many bands that have that. I mean, you've got an excellent guitarist, one of the best guitarists in Brad Gillis. I mean, they're such a talented band, not only from a songwriting standpoint, but a talent standpoint. And
Everybody's got, double duty in that band. And it's a unique setup for a band too. I can't think of another band that's quite like Night Ranger. I mean, you have, you know, if we're going to go into a different kind of, you've got the Eagles, and then you've got Toto, where there are multiple, like the instrumentalists are also singers. But Night Ranger, you've got your rhythm section. Your bass player and your drummer are your lead singers.
mhm.
You got two, no matter who's in the band at any one time, you've always got two fantastic guitar players, and then you got a keyboard player. And so together they create this sound. And I think that Night Ranger are one of those bands that sort of always had the respect amongst like people that like the heavier stuff because of Brad Gillis and Jeff Watson. Um, you know, because even though a lot of their songs are, they're a poppier kind of hard rock, they've got that blazing guitar. You can always count on them for a great guitar solo. And those guys were always in the guitar mags. And the fact that you had Brad, who was with Ozzy, I think that once you've been, if Ozzy Osbourne has you in his band, you were sort of anointed. So you've got
Mhm.
that cred with the metalheads, no matter how light your music was. I think that there was a lot of that. I think there's a lot of people that would, they'd be into the heavy, heavy, heavy stuff, and they'd be into Maiden and Priest and Ozzy and Dio and Sabbath and Night Ranger. And people might look at the Night Ranger, their Sister Christian, they're like, no, man, listen to this song, listen to that song. And they did have songs that rocked pretty hard, like Eddie's Coming Out Tonight and the song Night Ranger. So, they were an interesting band. They had a lot of different sounds, but what I love about them is that it was always positive lyrically. It was usually always um, encouraging. Jack Blades is a great songwriter. He writes these great little stories. He tells these little stories in 3.5, 4 minutes. Really good at doing that. I mean, there's a reason he became a pretty in-demand songwriter in the 1990s. Well, a lot of times it was him writing with Tommy Shaw, um, but no matter what kind of song they were doing, there was always a hook. There was always a chorus. It's something that would stick in your head, and where you can read the song title and go, "Oh yeah, that song." So yeah, they got a lot to offer, I think.
Oh. Now, this is your fifth book because we've got Unspooled, we've got the Y&T book, we've got the Kansas book, the Sammy Hagar book, um, now the Night Ranger book. Is there any in there I'm missing?
There's none that you're missing. No,
Okay. All
no,
right. So, how many more projects do you have like in the pipeline?
three.
Three. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I think you know about one of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've got three books that I'm working on that are in various states of completeness or incompleteness. Yeah, this is, I just enjoy doing this, and I enjoy spreading the word about this music that I love. And I've said it many, many times, like I love Kiss, but what am I going to write about Kiss? that hasn't
Right.
already been. There's so many. What am I going to write about Rush that hasn't already been written? I'd rather take these bands and try and elevate that standing a little bit so people go, Night Ranger. I like Night Ranger, and there's a book about them. I got to check this out. I don't really know much about this band, and it's an interesting band. They um, just the way that they came out in '82 with Dawn Patrol. When you know the history of the individual members of this band, like where did that sound come from? Because I don't hear it in anything that these guys did before. I don't hear it in Montrose. I don't hear it in Sammy Hagar's stuff. I certainly don't hear it in Rubicon. I don't hear it in Ozzy Osbourne. I don't. Where did that sound come from? I'm fascinated by it. It's one of the most complete professional sounding debut albums of the '80s by far. Dawn Patrol. It's so good. I mean, these guys were all vets, but the fact they came together and created their own sound right away, like it's not. There's no growing pains with this band. They arrived fully formed, and you can listen to that album, and there's nothing on there that sounds like a band's first album. There's no stepping stones along the way. Like if you listen to Aerosmith's first album, it doesn't really sound like Steven Tyler. You can hear bits, but it's not fully formed. You listen to Rush's first album. Enough said, it's Rush, but it's not the Rush that you would come to know. You listen to Night Ranger's first album, it's there. It's a complete package, and they just moved on from there.
Well, and two, I mean, you can like them. I mean, they're hard rock if you're a hard rock fan, but there were a lot of people who were not heavily into hard rock or heavy metal that enjoyed Night Ranger. My mom bought that Midnight Madness album when it came out back in the 80s.
Yeah.
So they had such a broad appeal because yeah, they were heavy, but not so heavy that they were turning off the mainstream music listener back then.
There was nothing. Yeah, Night Ranger. I've always said they're kind of in a unique. I don't really know how you'd classify them because back in the '80s, to use old-fashioned terminology, there was hard rock, which is bands like Def Leppard and Rat and Twisted Sister, and then there was rock. There was Journey, Foreigner, REO, just rock bands. Night Ranger is somewhere in between. They looked more like a hard rock band. They had the long hair, but it was like polite long hair. They didn't have a flat. They weren't. There was nothing threatening about them. There was nothing menacing about them. They didn't have a D. Snyder, or they didn't have like Motley Crue with the crazy makeup or anything like that. I'm not slamming those bands, but um, on the other hand, they they rocked a lot harder than just the bands that just did the regular rock stuff. So I think two things happen. I think they did have a really broad appeal, but on the other hand, as the years go by, they kind of fall between the cracks because people did not know how to classify them, and radio listeners. I think just radio listeners would be surprised to find out how many really hard rocking songs that they had. Now, or, people that like harder rock but kind of dismiss Night Ranger as a ballad band would also be pleasantly surprised to find that, oh, hey, they've got some pretty songs here that almost tip the scale towards heavy. I mean, there's no commercial record label that would say, oh, no, we're going to put the heavy song out as a single. If you have a hit with a ballad, it's happened to more, but just about any band you can think of in the '80s. That's what the record company wants. We need more of that. We can market a song like that easier than we can something that's heavier. So you know the downside is they in some corners they got painted as a ballad type of pop rock band, but on the other hand, they sold a lot of records doing it, and they were I think those songs all stand up. Like Sister Christian is one of those songs that I will never change the radio when that comes on. I think it's a brilliant song. I think that it's one of the quintessential power ballads because it's a ballad that actually has power. When that chorus kicks in, it packs a punch. It's not a strictly a love song. It's not cliche. There's nothing cliche about it. You've heard it a million times now, so you think it's cliche, but there's only one song that really sounds like that. Brad Gillis's guitar solo is one of my favorite guitar solos ever. It's dynamic, it's soft, loud. I think it's an amazing song, and I think it's fully deserving of that status. I just happen to think they've got other songs that should be as well known.
Hmm. Now, MCA, I don't think did the band that necessarily any favors, unfortunately. You
No.
think if they'd been on a different record label, they might have had more of those radio hits, like you were saying they should have had
Well,
more of?
it's an interesting situation with Night Ranger. It's always easy to blame the record label. Like I always rail on A&M Records with Y&T because I think they just dropped the ball with that band. You know, there were some record labels that were better than others. Now, the first album, Dawn Patrol, initially came out on Boardwalk Records, which was Neil Bogart's label after he left Casablanca. It wasn't around very long because Neil Bogart died the same year that Dawn Patrol came out. He might have even died before the album was released. So they had a hard time getting it in stores. Now, the good thing about MCA is that they stepped in and honored that Boardwalk contract, which I'm going to guess was for might have been for 7 albums because I think that's the greatest hits and the Live in Japan that came out at the end of the 80s was to honor those. But um, they, you know, most bands, you get signed to a label and then you get dropped or the label collapses. That's it. You're done. Sorry, coulda, shoulda, woulda. You know, there are exceptions. You know, Twisted Sister, same thing, same year. They put out Under the Blade on Secret Records. That goes under. They happen to sign with Atlantic. So MCA did a good thing, a really good thing. They picked the band up, they reissued Dawn Patrol, but if they'd have signed with a label like CBS, which had Journey and REO and Aldo Nova, um, it could have been different. You know, they could have been marketed. They might have known how to market them. They couldn't have been an easy band to market because at different times you're kind of getting different bands, but that doesn't mean that's not a bad thing. I always look at Atlantic Records as being maybe the gold standard back then because they had a very successful track record of rock. Uh, Maybe even Geffen Records. You know, Geffen could have done something more with Night Ranger. Um, I don't think MCA was the worst possible option, and it was better than us not knowing about this band or them coming up with one album and said, "Oh, remember that album? Yeah, that was good. Whatever happened to those guys?" Um, so you know, it's a mixed bag there. Or, you know, let's look at Warner Brothers, who did sign Damn Yankees. Maybe if Night Ranger had been on Warner Brothers, you know, who knows? So yeah, with MCA, it's somewhere in between. I mean, you know, my good buddy Davey Cretin calls it the music cemetery of America because they certainly didn't do right by a lot of rock bands. But you know, I think if it's better that Night Ranger ended up on MCA than ended up on A&M or RCA or Arista or just some of these record labels that were weaker when it came to rock music, you know, just did not know what to do. So it's somewhere in between. I'm sure that there were reps at MCA that were really into Night Ranger and really pushing hard for them. But what happens with a lot of these labels is that the personnel changes and suddenly there's no one at your label that was there when you first signed with them. So I think that
Right.
might have been what happened with Night Ranger at the end of the 80s. Also by the end of the 80s, this is the same thing that happened with the same thing that happened with Survivor, the same thing happened with 38 Special. For these bands that were rock bands but not heavy rock bands, you know, the pop metal, the hair metal, it was taking over. It wasn't enough to just be a good rock band. Loverboy is another example, and so Night Ranger was part of that. Even though, like I said, I think that Night Ranger influenced a lot of bands that became very, very popular, and I don't think I've ever heard anyone say they were influenced by Night Ranger, or I don't think I've ever heard a vocalist say they were influenced by Jack Blades and Kelly Kagi, which is a shame because you got two great singers in a band um, that were very different from each other and yet very complementary. It's just a shame. I think these guys, their influence runs deeper than you hear or see about.
Right, right. So if people want this book, it's available on Amazon.
Yeah, all my books are through Amazon wherever you live, whatever country is your home base. Just get it through. It's print to order. You'll have it in a couple days.
Yeah, now I always characterize these as great bathroom books. But
Me too.
also, yeah, I got my copy and I did when I took my trip to Panama, I had this book with me. It's great reading on the plane, at the airport, it's a fantastic read. On your channel, you're also doing a series of Night Ranger deep dives, taking each of their albums. You brought a guest in, and you guys break down the record and each song on the album. So check out Tim's channel if you are a Night Ranger fan, or if you're just a music fan in general. Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Anything else we need to know about this book or your channel? Things coming up, future projects?
Just more of the same, Jeff. Three new episodes a week, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday, and yeah, I'm on all the socials, and really appreciate everybody's support. Really appreciate you having me on to plug these books. And yeah, I just, like I said, the gratifying thing is when people come to me, they not only bought the book, obviously that's what I'm after, but when they say they bought the book and they find themselves ordering more and more Night Ranger CDs. I think that's fantastic. Spread the word. All people got to do is hear this stuff and go, why have I never heard of this band? Or why have I never given this band a fair shot before? You know, uh, some of the albums are easier to find than others, but I'll tell you right now, good if somebody's curious about Night Ranger, a great place to start that's I think still available is the Rock Candy reissues of the first two albums because they did a fantastic job. Because if you're like me and had those CDs a long time ago, they're old MCA CDs. They're very quiet. The Rock Candy remasters sound really good, and there's really good liner notes. If you start there and you're not convinced, I don't think you're a Night Ranger fan. I don't think there's a Night Ranger fan in you. But thanks for trying.
Right, right. Well, thanks for coming on, Tim, and good luck. You've already had success with the book, but look how thick that book is. It's not a pamphlet.
You brought it up, Jeff, and I appreciate that. The bathroom reader thing I take as a compliment because those are books that people read over and over again. You can read it from top to bottom chronologically if you want, or if you're sitting wherever you're sitting and think, I want to know about Dawn Patrol or I want to know about ATBPO. You can flip right to that chapter. It's not necessarily have to be a linear thing.
Or I didn't know they had any albums after Big Life. I
Well,
need to check out.
there you go. Yeah.
Yeah,
Turns out
yeah.
they have nine more.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks you, Tim. And I know we'll on your next project be getting together again, hopefully soon.
Yeah.
So take care, everybody. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.